to be working. Let's see if this does, because sometimes in this room, it's good to have a break. Okay, good. We'll use that. Cool.
Bobby gave me a whole thing to talk about.
Oh, okay. Great.
Go, Bobby.
No worries.
Well, hopefully she's on Zoom.
I can see who it is. Let's see. Oh, I'm using this and that's not. I need to use my own laptop. Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Not yet.
My husband had to have a doctor's appointment, so
Yeah, that's what she
no
said.
doctor sometimes.
Yeah, they run late sometimes. For
They
sure.
take their time.
Yes, they take their time. That's all right. That's all right. I didn't know you'd be here. Well, happy to see you. You don't have to be quiet. That's not a rule.
No, I'm just telling you.
Oh, on your, yeah. Oh, okay, good, because I've got else.
Yeah.
We're on.
I can just pause it.
Okay. Did Linda leave? Okay, I'll wait till Linda comes back. Oh, okay, perfect.
I won't.
All right, good evening and welcome to the November 11th, 2024 Norman Willett Memorial Lecture. My name is Brian Forster. I'm from St. Joseph's University, and I'm the co-chair along with Bobby McHale, formerly of Gwynedd Mercer University, of the Education Committee of the Eastern Pennsylvania branch of the American Society for Microbiology. We want to thank you for attending the second Norman Willett Lecture of 2024. Normally in the past, we've had these seminars in May and June, but this year we decided to have one in November. It's been a long-standing tradition of the branch that one meeting each year would be sponsored by the Education Committee and focus on many of the different aspects of microbiology education, from those educating high school students through post-graduation education. This concept was originally suggested many years ago by Dr. Norman Willett, co-chair of the Education Committee at that time. Dr. Willett was a professor emeritus of the Temple University Dental School, president of the branch from 1975 to 1977, and a strong advocate for involving students in science education from kindergarten through high school. To this end, Dr. Willett developed science modules that were shared in a variety of programs, and students and teachers could take these back to their schools. In order to facilitate these programs, Dr. Willett was the recipient of many grants, including the Howard Hughes Medical Institute grants and National Institutes of Health grants. Dr. Willett passed away in 2014, but his legacy lives on through these annual presentations in his honor and the committee's commitment to outreach lessons in local elementary schools and giving awards at regional science fairs. Today, we are pleased to have Dr. Willett's children, Susan and David, join us. Each year, the Education Committee invites a renowned speaker in the field of microbiology education and related fields to share his or her views with branch members and their guests. This evening, we're delighted to have Jennifer Stanford as our speaker. Dr. Stanford received her PhD from Harvard University, where she focused on cell and developmental biology, and her undergraduate degree is from Elizabethtown College, where she majored in biology with a minor in biochemistry. Dr. Stanford is currently a professor in the Department of Biology, all the way from Drexel. Glad the commute was good. Dr. Stanford is committed to improving STEM undergraduate education in a variety of ways and is certainly committed to excellence in biology education overall. Dr. Stanford has focused her research on inclusivity in STEM and speaks about the need for change to increase the number of minority students in biology and ways to affect this change. Dr. Stanford has received grants too numerous to mention, but several were from Howard Hughes Medical Institute, similar to Dr. Willett. Her publications include many articles, and she's given numerous presentations. She has taught a variety of courses at Drexel and Harvard and has mentored many projects. Dr. Stanford has also received numerous teaching awards, most notably the Lindback Distinguished Teaching Award, Drexel University's President's Award for Diversity and Inclusive Community, and the Rothworth Award for Teaching Excellence. Today, Dr. Stanford will give us insights on how inclusivity can be addressed in STEM education and the importance of this topic. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Stanford.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm really excited to be here. As Brian mentioned, I'm Jen Stanford, and I'm a professor of biology here at Drexel. I'm also co-director of a center here at Drexel called CASTLE, which stands for the Center for the Advancement of STEM Teaching and Learning Excellence. And I'll talk a little bit about CASTLE today. So I'm really excited to talk to you about my work, and I want to talk about some pathways to inclusive STEM education teaching practice. I'm going to focus primarily on higher education, but I have a few places where I want to talk about K-12 education as well and how it relates. And so this is an overview of what I'd like to talk about today. I'm going to give you an overview of my center, and then I want to give you some background about why this is so important. So why should we be thinking about inclusivity in STEM education? And then I'm going to talk about 3 different ways that we can use as tools to promote effective and inclusive teaching. So one is professional development as a tool. I want to also talk about research and how we can engage in research in this area as a mechanism to understand use of effective and inclusive teaching practices. And I want to talk about community as a mechanism to promote effective and inclusive teaching practices. And then I want to talk more broadly about how we can facilitate inclusivity in STEM education. When I'm giving talks, I like to give people something to walk away with that they can maybe do on their own, no matter where you're at in your career right now, to actually engage in this work. And so I want to talk about my center a little bit. So as I mentioned, my center is called Castle. So we have dragons at Drexel. So we needed to build a castle. So we did. And our mission is to affect institutional change in STEM education by promoting effective and inclusive teaching. So this is core to the work of the center. And the director of the center is Adam Fontecchio. He's a professor of electrical and computer engineering. He's also the national/international director of an organization I'll talk about today called CERTL, which stands for the Center for the Integration of Research, Teaching, and Learning. And so we're really fortunate that at Drexel we have the head of this international organization as part of the center. The other co-director of the center is Jason Silverman. He is professor of mathematics education. So what you'll notice is that the center has people that represent different disciplines. We're actually also in different colleges. Jason is in the School of Education. I'm in the College of Arts and Sciences at Drexel, and Adam is in the College of Engineering. We have many other colleagues that we work with from other disciplines in STEM and other colleges. So we're really intentional about trying to be inclusive with regards to STEM disciplines and colleges at Drexel. And the URL is at the bottom if you want to learn more about the center. But I wanted to just briefly talk about this. There's this great article from Carlisle and Weaver that came out in 2018 that talked about what STEM education centers do. So if you might be more familiar with a teaching and learning center, STEM education centers are a little bit different. So we work to improve STEM learning, engage in STEM education research, which I'll talk about today. We want to enhance STEM teaching and learning quality, build communities in STEM education research, and I'll talk about a couple of the communities that we've built or are part of as part of our center. We want to broaden participation and capacity for STEM teaching and learning at institutions and beyond. We also provide infrastructure for broader impacts. So if a faculty member is submitting an NSF grant, NSF grants have broader impacts that are required, which usually require engaging with a broader community, and our center can help to facilitate that. We support the K through 16, and I would say beyond that, STEM pipeline. So looking at K-12 education and higher education and beyond. And then we also address national priorities. So that's just a little bit of a snapshot of what our center does. And the work that I'm going to describe today is all in partnership with our center. So people who work in STEM education think of lots of different questions, but these are some of the primary questions that I sometimes say keep me up at night, but not in a bad way. Like they excite me. I'm engaged in thinking about these things. And I think every educator on some level thinks about how do we effectively support student learning, right? How do we get students to learn? We also think about how do we support instructors towards use of effective pedagogical techniques. So a lot of times when we talk about teaching, there are people that can point fingers at instructors and say, well, the instructors need to do a better job. And that's not fair because most instructors really care and are trying to do a good job, but they maybe don't have the right resources or they haven't been educated about things, or there's many other barriers, and I'll talk about some of these today. And so we have to think about how we support our instructors too, if we want to get this to happen. How do we create learning environments that are inclusive and promote equity, which I think feeds right back into the first question. How do we effectively support student learning? So we have to think about these issues. And last, how do we increase access to beneficial learning experiences? So the primary one I think about here is research. We know research experiences are beneficial for all students, regardless of discipline, regardless of what they want to go on to do. We can't offer these experiences to every student. And so can we figure out how we can expand access to the components of those experiences to allow all students to benefit from them? And so that's another question that we broadly think about. And so I want to talk a little bit about why we should care about these questions. And it may be that everyone in this audience today already cares about these questions, but I think it's important to talk about data that informs why we should care about these questions, because this might be something that's a take home for you to be able to advocate to others as to why we should care about these questions. And so this image is sometimes surprising to people. Sometimes people have seen it before. And so what's at the top is high school education, the percentage of students or people in this country that are high school educated. And what's at the bottom is the percentage of people in this country who have a bachelor's degree or higher. And then across the bottom, we go from 1969 to, it's a little out of date, 2019, pre-pandemic. And what you'll notice is it's around 33% of adults in this country that are college educated. And that goes against what we hear sometimes. We sometimes hear, oh, well, everybody goes to college these days. Only about 33% of our adult population is college educated. So that's not true that everybody has that kind of degree. And so we're not elitist. Why is this a problem? This is a problem because job growth is happening in places that require college education. And so this came from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so what you'll see, the places where growth is occurring, post-secondary non-degree award, associate's degree, bachelor's degree, master's degree, doctoral professional degree. So having some college, that's where college education, that's where the growth is happening. So there's increasing demand for college educated employees. And so we have what's being called a jobs degree gap in our country, where 65% of the jobs require a college degree, but only around 33% of Americans hold bachelor's degrees, and this includes our retirees. So the actual percentage of people who are in the workforce is lower than that. So in order to develop a college-educated workforce, we need people to come to college. And according to the National Center for Education Statistics, about 20 million students a year are going to college. And this is supposed to increase about 3% from now to 2030. There was a little dip, you'll notice, right around 2020, which is very predictable because of the pandemic. So enrollment is not projected to change a huge amount over the coming years, and we largely have no ability to control the types of jobs in the workforce as academics in any significant way. So the major way that we as academics have to address the jobs degree gap is to increase the number of people who are completing college degrees. And so if we look at graduation rates for undergraduates, on the left is the percentage of students completing an associate's degree. So about 33% of people who start an associate's degree finish it. And on the right is the bachelor's degree. So about 62% of people who start a bachelor's degree finish it. So that's a place where we can make change and we can help support students to get to graduation. So we can increase the percentage of adults in this country that are college educated. So in the data that I've shown so far, we focused on jobs, college enrollment, and college graduation in general. What's the situation in STEM? So this graph came from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it shows employment distribution by typical entry-level educational requirement. On the left is STEM occupations, on the right is all occupations. And so what you'll notice is that STEM occupations, the lowest level of education required is some college, and then it goes up from there. If we look at all occupations, there's a percentage of jobs that requires no formal education, and another large percentage of jobs that requires high school diploma, okay? So STEM jobs require some level of college education. And so this situation is even more notable in STEM fields. STEM jobs on average are higher paying than non-STEM jobs, and these are going to be primarily accessible with some college training. So college training is needed for STEM jobs, and it's likely not a surprise to the people in this room that retention in STEM fields is also an issue. So this data is a little bit out of date, but this is from the National Center for Education Statistics. More recent data hasn't been put together for this specific question. But in brief, this is the percentage of STEM students in different disciplines who either left college, that's the dark blue, or graduated in a non-STEM field, and that's the light blue. And then it's further broken down by field. So 48% of students who start as STEM majors don't graduate with a STEM degree. Okay, that situation is worse in some disciplines. So computer science, where it's 59% don't leave with a STEM degree, and better in math, where most of those students graduate with some sort of a STEM degree. And so I don't have time to go through every piece of data about this, but I wanted to emphasize that there's an issue with demographics and retention in STEM as well. So a smaller percentage of students from races and ethnicities that have been underrepresented traditionally in STEM are earning STEM degrees. A smaller percentage of women are earning STEM degrees, and a smaller percentage of LGBTQIA+ students are earning STEM degrees. This is not to say that students with disabilities are earning some other STEM degrees at a higher percentage or an equal percentage. This is just the data that existed, which is that a smaller percentage of students with disabilities earn STEM doctorates. So there are challenges for certain demographics in addition to the other challenges that I mentioned. So my work focuses on STEM education in higher education, but my understanding is that this community includes some people who are more focused on K-12 education. So I wanted to include this information as well. If we want to have a more diverse and representative community of people in STEM occupations, not only do we have to find ways to be more inclusive in higher education environments, we have to encourage a diverse community of students to consider studying in STEM disciplines. And challenges to this start in K-12 environments, where students from demographic groups that have been minoritized in STEM are often discouraged from STEM fields due to stereotypes. And this is unfortunate for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is that learning in STEM fields in K-12 environments can benefit everyone because students who take those courses are gaining skills in critical thinking and problem solving, which is really important for college readiness. And recent work has suggested that effective and inclusive STEM teaching in K-12 has specific characteristics. And spoiler alert, these characteristics are what we should be thinking about in higher education environments too. We have to illustrate how STEM fields can solve problems that are important in society. So I always think about when I was in high school and I was learning about physics and we were weighing fish in elevators. And that was not a problem I really connected to because I didn't know how that would be relevant in my life, right? And in biology sometimes too, we have these problems that aren't necessarily connected. And people who have been traditionally minoritized in STEM disciplines often want to feel that the work they're going to engage in is something that's important in society. So they want to think about medicine, they want to think about there's a great group on this campus that's working on peace engineering, like how do we facilitate peace? And so we have to think about that. We also have to show realistic work in STEM, that STEM can be fun and interesting. It's not just about memorizing a bunch of facts and repeating experiments that other people have done and making sure you repeat them exactly and perfectly. That is not the work of STEM. That's not what we really do. And so engaging people in the realistic work, the real work of STEM is what inspires people. We have to help students develop an identity in STEM, that they have capacity and ability to do this work. And we need to empower people and provide them with a sense of belongingness. So again, this is not just true in K-12. This is true in any environment we can think about. So while there are differences to how this might be implemented in K-12 versus higher education environments, what we're ultimately trying to do is to help students to realize that they can be successful and that they can find pathways to satisfying work that they want to do. So why is any of what I'm saying important? Hopefully you already feel like it's important, but I want to give you something else. There are a lot of articles that have been written about this, and they indicate important issues relating to the output of the STEM workforce. And one of my favorite articles about this was written by Kenny Gibbs, who was at the NIH at the time. And he has this article that's called Diversity in STEM, What It Is and Why It Matters. And I encourage you to look at it. It's about 10 years old at this point, but I think it still has a lot of value. And in this article, he indicates that diversity is critical to excellence in STEM because we need diverse problem solvers to solve difficult problems. He mentions that the lack of diversity represents loss of talent. When people leave, we're missing critical contributors who had important and relevant training. And he mentions that diversity is important for economic growth and global competitiveness. Our STEM workforce doesn't reflect our population, so it's unlikely that this is the best possible workforce that it could be. But I think it matters not just for those reasons, but it also matters because we shouldn't be alienating and discouraging people for the wrong reasons. We don't want people to feel like they can't when they can. We don't want to turn people off who were so excited to do this work. And now they feel like people don't want them in that space or to engage in this work or that they can't be successful. So we don't want to alienate people for the wrong reasons. And as well, This approach prepares everyone for success because we work in a global society. We have to work with other people, and we have to work with other people who are different from us. And so this type of approach can help everyone to learn things that they need to learn to do to be successful. So there was work that was started, and the first round of this was done in 1997. This was repeated more recently in 2019. And this work was to try to understand why students leave STEM disciplines specifically. And this was looking in higher education environments. And so some of these things probably aren't surprising. So the first thing was how we teach. So there's too much content in courses. The presentation can be incoherent. Where we pitch the material might be too high or too low. We're focused on memorization. We're not delivering information in a particularly compelling way. That's one topic or one reason. Fixed mindset is another, both on the part of the students or on the part of the faculty. Okay, so this idea that, well, if you're not good at this, you're not going to be successful. Okay, the reality is growth mindset is the way to go. Just because you don't know how to do something now doesn't mean you can't learn how to do it and be successful. But sometimes students or faculty that they work with have a fixed mindset, and that can be problematic. Lack of support or information about support can be a problem. And this can lead people to think that it's their individual effort and their intelligence that's the only thing that matters, as opposed to you could get help, you could get support, you could have a community that supports you in doing this, and that could help you be successful. Many students have concerns about their math ability, and they drop out of STEM before they even begin because they think that they can't be successful. Again, that can be a fixed mindset issue. Lack of esteem for the discipline, so not necessarily connecting with that discipline or thinking you can be successful in that discipline. Lack of connection with others, see, community is really big in every way we can think about it. And then financial issues, which are, of course, an issue, not something that we as faculty can necessarily do something about, but still important to note. So what compels people to stay? Research experiences, changing classroom pedagogical approaches, providing students with support. Obviously, financial incentives and support is important. Community building, peer tutoring, advising, and aspiration for a particular career. So this is intrinsic to the student. And this is a biology space. How many people have taught pre-meds? Okay, some people. So pre-meds often have an aspiration to be doctors. And because of that, no matter what happens, they are not dissuaded from doing the thing because they have this intrinsic motivation to pursue that particular career. So what I want to focus on today, as there's all these things we can do, right? What I'd like to focus on is promoting active learning. And so active learning is known to improve STEM undergraduate student learning. This article from Scott Freeman and his colleagues that came out in 2014 is so powerful. My favorite part of this article is at the end when he says that if this was a clinical trial, we'd have to stop the lecture only section because it is so much, it's so clear that it's less effective than the active learning approaches that are being used. And so active learning is known to be effective in improving STEM undergraduate student learning. In part, this is because in order to learn, concepts have to enter our working memory. And to do that, they have to get through what's called perception filters. So if you're thinking about the fact that you just broke up with your partner, or you are hungry, or you forgot to do something, the stove's still on, I don't know, or you have barriers because you have misconceptions about a topic, that can block information from getting to your working memory. Engaging in active learning can help to facilitate the movement of that information through the perception filter into the working memory, where you can actually do something with it and hopefully move it eventually to your long-term memory. Learning also requires that we challenge and address our preconceptions, we engage in metacognitive work, and we transfer knowledge to new contexts, and active learning can help with all of those processes as well. So we've known this for decades, and there have been all these glossy articles that have come out and have indicated that we need to make change in regards to this. And change is not happening at the level that most people would expect or want to see. And so why is that the case? In part, this is because the reward structure in academia doesn't necessarily reward good teaching. And I'll talk more about that. But if we have a zero-sum game between research and teaching, and the institution says we value research and we don't really value teaching through its actions and behaviors, not necessarily through its words, then what are people going to do? They're going to focus on their research, and they probably should, right? Because you don't want to put yourself in a bad situation where you're not doing the parts of your job that you're expected to do. I will show some evidence that you can do both and be successful. And I hopefully leave with that message, but certainly reward structure is an issue. Lack of knowledge and training. So thankfully, I know there are people in this audience that come from the Penport program. We do have ways that we are training people to learn about effective teaching, but most places don't hire based on that, right? They hire based on someone's research prowess, not necessarily whether they're effective teachers. Distrust of the literature. So many STEM faculty do not believe that the education literature has any value. And so that's a challenge. Lack of identity centered on teaching. Many faculty have a researcher identity. They don't necessarily have a teacher identity. Not true of all faculty, but that is a challenge. The I learned this way. So this is a common thing that you hear. We have to remember that the spaces that we have in academia are not representative of our general society. And so therefore, not everyone was able to learn that way and get to those places. And so just because you were able to learn that way doesn't mean that that's the best way for everyone to learn. Lack of time, this is real. So the time it takes to implement things, the time it takes to learn about things, and then the fear about not having a model or a community to talk to when you're trying to do something really new or different and you've never seen this before. So one way to support a change in teaching is professional development. So professional development can support instructors in overcoming barriers to change, some of the barriers that I just talked about. And so I work with an organization called CERTL, the Center for the Integration of Research, Teaching, and Learning. This is the organization I mentioned that the international director is at Drexel. And it's a network of 45 research universities across this country, and then a couple other countries are starting to bring universities to the table, which is exciting that we're becoming international. So we serve more than 3,000 STEM future faculty each year, and our programs are aimed at STEM graduate students and postdoctoral fellows. We are intending to prepare future faculty, future academics to be effective teachers and mentors. We aim to increase both diversity in STEM fields and STEM literacy nationwide, and the people who participate can earn nationally ranked certificates of achievement. This is one example of how we can target future faculty. Certainly ERACTA programs like Penport is another mechanism that we can use to do this, but anything we can do to help train future faculty before they even arrive at their final destination, their job, about how to teach is a very valuable thing to do. We were also interested in teaching current faculty and providing a professional development experience for current faculty. And so we developed a course that really was focused on promoting student learning in large STEM classrooms. So it's very different to teach, using active learning in a 24 student class versus a 200 student class. And many STEM faculty feel apprehensive about thinking about how to do this. And I think there's good reason for that. And there needs to be discussion about how that's different and how you can implement active learning approaches in those spaces. So my colleague Dan King and I, he's in chemistry at Drexel, taught this course, and we developed it with our colleagues Donna Marasco, Mary Jo Giardina, and Elisa Morse-Klein, who were all at Drexel at the time. And our goal was to provide opportunities for faculty to share their experiences in teaching large classrooms. That's community, right? So we're doing community building. We wanted to discuss evidence-based strategies. We wanted to consider how to implement effective pedagogies in large classroom environments and provide support and feedback as faculty developed an idea of something they wanted to implement in the classroom. So what we ended up developing was a one-term course, and the people who were involved needed to implement an evidence-based strategy after the course was done. They got a one-term, one-course buyout. And so this was an effort on our part to try to give them that time that we knew was a barrier to be able to implement the strategy. We had them engage in reflection and feedback. We focused on the large classroom environment. We encouraged interaction between the participants. And we used examples from the local institution. In part, that's because it was easy to do, but the real reason for this is that people often do not believe things that happen at other institutions can happen at theirs. So, we're right across from Penn. Well, that could happen at Penn, that can't happen at Drexel. And I'm sure if we went and talked about any of the institutions that are represented in the room, that would be the same kind of commentary. So if you can use examples from your own campus, that can sometimes compel change in a new way. Our course learning goals were focused on helping the faculty to learn about evidence-based teaching and specific pedagogies. We wanted to have them learn about the vocabulary of evidence-based teaching and identify resources. And this came about sort of as a just-in-time teaching moment. We were pretty surprised at the beginning of the first time we taught the course that people were implementing these strategies, but they had no idea what they were called. And so that meant that they couldn't learn more about them because they didn't even have the language to be able to say, oh, that's this type of approach, and be able to read more about it. So that was something we really wanted to make sure they got as part of this course. And they had to plan some sort of evidence-based pedagogy to implement for a large introductory STEM course. That didn't mean they had to change their whole course. They just had to try something in their course. In terms of course activities, a lot of what we did was reflection. So they had to reflect on who they were as teachers, what they knew about effective teaching, what they wanted to learn about. We provided them with readings. We also provided them with instruction on particular topics. There were discussion board posts. We had discussions in class. They had to engage in a teaching observation. This was not that we observed them. They went and observed someone of their choice so they could sort of sit in the student role again and see what that was like. We didn't dictate who they observed or any of that. They just had to observe someone's large class in STEM. And then the capstone experience was that they had to develop a plan for implementation of a strategy. And so with my colleagues, we studied this approach to try to understand a few different things. And two of my former postdocs were involved in this project, as well as a number of my colleagues at Drexel and in Castle. And so the questions that we were interested in were, does the course successfully promote pedagogical change? And what are the course participants' thought processes around course topics? And we were really interested in that because as thought changes, even if the action hasn't changed yet, you might get action change if the thoughts are changing. We interviewed faculty participants, and we ultimately had 11 respondents, and we did modified grounded theory approach to evaluate the interviews. And so big picture outcomes, most of the respondents made progress and changed their teaching practices even more towards evidence-based instruction. And a minority of respondents remained focused on traditional lecture-based thinking and practice. And so the group that changed, they reflected, they gained confidence, they learned to overcome barriers that they perceived, they changed their practices, and they recognized the importance in community and helping to support them through this. For the people who didn't change as much, they still implemented an evidence-based approach, but their thinking wasn't all the way there. They were resistant to change. They perceived students as a barrier. So there was this narrative of, well, students don't want to do this. Kind of like what I was saying before about people pointing the finger at instructors. There was a lot of pointing the finger at the students. And they incorrectly saw active learning as an entertainment technique. So they said, well, we need to disrupt the lecture to do something because otherwise the students will fall asleep, as opposed to understanding that the active learning is where the learning really happens. So there was a disconnect there. And so some of the implications that came out of this work were that this type of professional development could help to support faculty that are bought in already to doing this kind of change, but maybe need some more support, community, and infrastructure to actually get to the point where they're making that change. And the people who were in the minority, we think that they probably need some initial support to understand how people learn before they're ready to actually engage in this type of professional development experience. So they had a conflicted understanding of student-centered instruction. So we think some initial teachings about how people learn might have helped to support that group even further. There were some important factors that came out of this work that are also supported by the literature. If you're in a position to create professional development experiences for people, longer-term experiences are really important. So a one-off workshop might inspire you to go do something else, but in and of itself is not sufficient for change to occur. And so this was a full, we don't have semesters, we have quarters here. So it was a quarter-long course, so 10 weeks. Community building is really important. It's important in everything we're talking about here. Who instructs the course is important. So my colleague Dan and I are both STEM faculty. We have both taught in large classroom environments. We both continue to teach in large classroom environments. So that trust factor, there was trust because we are engaging in the environments that these people are thinking about making these changes in. Providing opportunities for reflection is really important for the growth and the thinking about this. And opportunities to build confidence are really important because that's one of the barriers is people don't feel confident, even if they're excited about using a particular approach. So another way to support change in teaching is through research. With a variety of colleagues that I'll talk about in a minute, we were interested in trying to understand what correlates with people's use of active learning. So people are doing active learning in lots of different places in STEM. So what is it that kind of compelled them to do this? And we, through doing this work, wanted to see if there were structural changes or things that we could do with professional development as a result of what we learned from this information. And so with colleagues from Florida International University, Loyola, University of Miami, and Drexel, and with support from Howard Hughes Medical Institute, we were studying use of active learning techniques. And the research question that we had was, what are factors that correlate with faculty adoption and use of active learning techniques in their teaching? And so the approach we used, we developed a survey which we called the Change in Implementation of Pedagogical Practices Survey, or CHIP. This survey looks at frequency of instructional practices used by faculty in their most frequently taught course or in their most recent course. It looks at institutional support structures, demographics, departmental and institutional climate, and a number of different other areas. We collected data from respondents at 66 institutions across the country, and we had about 740 tenure track and tenured faculty that were included in this data set. And so this is important because you can see right away some of the limitations of this study. The respondents were primarily male, primarily white, primarily tenured. And we specifically sent this out to biology, physics, and chemistry departments. And so biology is the most represented discipline in this data set. So this is not representative of all people at these institutions, and that's just an important limitation to point out. So this is a little challenging to navigate. So what we're looking at here is all faculty, pre-tenured faculty, tenured faculty, And across the bottom is use this approach never to every class. And then there's different types of teaching approaches that were used. The lighter the box, the more, the higher the percentage of people that did that thing. So 82% of people lectured in every class or reported lecturing in every class. Now, only 6% of faculty never used any active learning techniques. And the most commonly used active learning technique was real-time responses. So you can see this here, 46% used it in every class. And certainly people used it weekly, monthly, or 1 to 2 times as well. So real-time responses is clickers or the like, right? You might use a flashcard instead of clickers, or you might do a hand raise, how many people think number A or letter A, et cetera. So that's what's meant by real-time responses. The other thing we looked at was about this barrier with regards to the value of teaching and how institutions value teaching. And so this in white is in theory, and in green is in practice. So the reports out, this won't be surprising, is that in theory, institutions value teaching about 1/3 in the tenure and promotion process. But the perception is that in practice, that's not true, that it's much less. And I think that's not rocket science. We all think that, but it wasn't really in the literature. So it was important for us to actually document this and have this in the literature. And this can certainly be a barrier to implementation if people perceive that the work in this space is not valued. Sure.
So that's the perception of faculty, but part of the survey actually looking at the policies?
No, it's a survey.
What does the policy say? And is the policy really give teaching higher percentage than the actual work?
So that's why I was very careful to say that this is a perception. This is a survey, so it's not looking at policy. This was strictly looking at perception, and perceptions, as you're pointing out, could be wrong. However, perceptions still influence behavior. So this is strictly perception, yes.
It's no fact, and you don't get your grants, you don't get tenure. So, you know, I'm not arguing with it, I'm just saying that they can be the best teacher you want to be. I think institutions will state officially that they value teaching much more than they actually do.
Sure, and that's the point, right? It was that's the perception of the faculty. So in terms of, we also wanted to look at the perception of obstacles to implementing active learning techniques. And what's in the blue-purple bar is pre-tenured faculty, and the orangish bar is tenured faculty. So tenured faculty perceived, there were more tenured faculty that perceived that there were no barriers compared to pre-tenured faculty, which was somewhat of a surprise, because we felt like pre-tenure faculty may have had more exposure to these types of techniques, either through learning about them or actually experiencing them as undergrads or graduate students. But if we talk about the major barriers that people talked about, one was time to implement, that it takes time to do this. Class size, so as we've been talking about, if you're teaching in a large class, that can be a barrier. Room layout, if you're in a fixed classroom environment like this one, a little bit more difficult to do active learning, that's people's perception. And then time to learn, how long it takes to learn to use that technique. Those were all barriers that were perceived. And so what we did was we tried to see, of all the things that we looked at in this survey, were there any factors that predicted use of active learning? And so what was interesting was that pre-tenure and tenured faculty had different predictors. So for pre-tenure faculty, it was the number of talks that they contributed on STEM education. So for pre-tenure faculty, if they were engaged in STEM education research and talking about STEM education, that predicted their use of active learning, but nothing else did, which is interesting. For tenured faculty, knowledge of STEM education initiatives, engaging with people who provided them with informal feedback, were predictors. And here's a really important predictor: total number of publications in their scientific discipline. which was a big surprise. So them being successful as researchers predicted that they would use active learning techniques in the classroom, which goes against what most people say. You can do one or the other, well, you can't do both. That sort of flies in the face of that. Negative predictor was the total number of perceived barriers to use of active learning. So if tenured faculty perceived there were a lot of barriers, they wouldn't do it. Okay. And so there's some take-home messages from this. Change is happening. People are using active learning techniques. The most common technique used was real-time responses. So there have been a number of articles written about that being the gateway approach, that you use that, you get familiar with it, and then you might use other approaches. There were no differences between pre-tenure and tenured faculty in the adoption of active learning. So both groups used it from the group that we surveyed. Faculty perceived that institutions weigh teaching less in practice during TMP decisions. Pre-tenure faculty perceive more obstacles in implementing active learning, and faculty can teach using evidence-based approaches and still have time for research, which is really an important finding. There are limitations to the study. We already talked about some of them. The respondents that we had are likely not representative of all faculty, and we certainly did not include one group of faculty, which is teaching faculty, in this particular data set that we were looking at. The responses were self-reported, so as discussed earlier, the perceptions may not equal reality, and we can't determine causation from this study. So I want to just talk briefly about another way to change or to support a change in teaching, which is community formation. So we can work together across different institutions to support, promote, and evaluate inclusive teaching. And so I'm part of a community that's supported by a Howard Hughes Medical Institute Inclusive Excellence 3 grant. Our focus is on faculty and how we can support, promote, and evaluate inclusive teaching. And the ultimate goal of this work is success of STEM undergraduate students. So we have a team of 15 institutions from across the United States that are part of this community, which is called Learning Community Cluster 5, which is like, that doesn't connect for anyone, but that's our team. We have large and small institutions. We have public and private institutions. We have an MSI, 2 MSIs. We are representing different geographic regions, different student populations. And we work together as an inclusive community to try to address these problems. And there's real value in learning from each other in these different contexts and providing support to each other as we try to engage in this work, because this work is hard. And knowing that other people are struggling with it and how they're getting through those struggles is really valuable and helpful. So we have 6 different projects we're working on. We're focused on belongingness, so how we can promote that for students. We have 2 data collection projects. One is focused on supporting and evaluating change. One is focused on driving change. We are studying pathways to faculty incentivization, reward, and evaluation structures. We are defining key terms relevant to the work. And of course, we're engaging in faculty development. And so in the last couple minutes, I want to leave you with some things that we all could do to think about how to facilitate change. So one is that we can all improve our own teaching. We can use effective and inclusive approaches in our classes. And if you don't know how to do that, you can seek out training and support on your own campus from your colleagues to engage in that work. If you happen to have skills and knowledge in this space, you can help others to improve their teaching. And you can do this formally through providing professional development opportunities, but you can also do it on a much smaller scale through conversations with your colleagues or doing peer evaluation, not in a punitive way, but just getting together with a colleague and providing some suggestions and feedback about what they're doing. If you're in a position where you are engaged in curricular development, you could work to facilitate change through improving your curricula for your program, for your institution, or perhaps beyond your institution. So professional societies engage in this work in a variety of ways, and so you can get involved in those approaches if you have interest. We can support student learning beyond the classroom as well. So providing infrastructure for student support, mechanisms to support student belongingness. And I could have given a whole talk on this, but I know you guys just recently heard about CURES, course-based undergraduate research experiences, as a mechanism to expand access to research. We're also thinking about experiential learning as another way to expand access to research experiences or research-like experiences. You can engage in work to support institutional policy changes if you're in a position to do that and you have interest. So this could be changes around faculty development, incentivization, reward and evaluation structures, or around student support so that we can make sure that those structures are in place. If you have the capacity and interest to do this, you can engage in research to try to develop effective and inclusive practices or understand how to promote change. And I've been very influenced by this figure. I feel like I think about this all the time. So this came from Henderson, Beach, and Finkelstein, and this was from 2011. And there's this quadrant. At the top is individual approaches that can be used. At the bottom is environments and structures. And then on the left is prescribed, and on the right is emergent. So the three that are here have many, many flaws, okay? They work, but there's challenges to them working. So disseminating curriculum, so telling other people, here's curriculum that you can use. That can work, but there are challenges with that. Developing reflective teachers who are reflecting on what they're doing and how it's working. Enacting policy, so having someone in the upper administration coming in and saying, everyone is going to do this. Okay, there's challenges to that as well. The approach that seems to be the most effective, but also the hardest to make happen, is developing shared vision. And this is where people on the ground that are doing the work, that are engaging in the teaching, come together with the administrators and develop a shared vision that everybody benefits from with regards to this. So if there's buy-in from the top and there's buy-in from the bottom, then you can get change to happen much more readily. That's challenging. It requires a lot of discussion and really creating mutual understanding and values together. And that can be difficult. It's not for everyone to do, but if it's something that you can get involved in, it can help to facilitate change. So I just want to remind everyone that changing teaching is not the only way to make change. There were all these other things that help students to remain in STEM. And so if something else is compelling to you, there are other ways to engage this. But I wanted to end on a positive note, which is that change is possible. Change is happening. There are many more people that are using active learning approaches now than were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Change is slow. You're not alone if you're doing this work. So find your community, find your team to provide that support. Learn from the literature and find examples and models if you can on your own campus. But importantly, make sure you're celebrating small wins and taking a moment to appreciate the progress that you've made to help with your mental health and make sure that you feel good about the work that you're doing. And with that, I'm going to just thank all the people that I've worked with and the teams and the funding, and open it up for questions.
So, when you were doing your survey with the faculty that self-reported, did they comment if those classes were just straight lecture or lecture lab, or like lecture lab recitation?
Yes, so we did distinguish between those. And I think if it was a lab only class, it went into a bucket. We were specifically looking at classes where we were asking about the lecture component of a course, that's a really important question. Other questions? Yeah.
Given the indication on how many programs are cutting back on lab experience? Well, the reason why I asked you was in medical school, we don't have labs anymore. For medical students, it's all small group discussions, whatever, maybe a demo or something, but the way I learn. But you know, decades ago, we used to have, you know, lab experiences. What about in undergraduate?
So I don't have the data, I can't say a specific, piece of data about that, but I will say that with the challenges with higher ed financing right now, and, this is at every institution, you're seeing challenges with finances. This is a place where a lot of administrators want to cut, right? Because it's small, right? These are small environments and it costs money to do that. I think that a lot of faculty are pushing back about that, especially at the undergraduate level, going back to some of the things I said earlier. And in fact, a lot of schools are trying to push to get more authentic experiences for the reasons I mentioned. That if you're doing a canned lab, that's not as exciting as engaging in authentic research. So a lot of people are pushing the other way, and they're doing that using retention as a driver. So it's been shown that if students are engaging in these types of experiences, they're much more likely to retain at the institution and in the discipline. And so you can tie money to that and say, here you go. Some schools, you're not going to be able to make this happen, right? But certainly it's a push that a lot of institutions are making to keep labs. That's a big question.
Yeah, the same problem after the next school. Essentially, we just changed completely the labs are just completely right. So I think it's a money issue, but it's also the movement of education in this profession where it's more and more to learn modern techniques. So even the professionals are maybe second years, a lot of things are I mean, I remember my grandfather had 2 books of botanics and was an MD and was studying plants. So that's the evolution of the profession, how we move certain things to place to understand.
Which it's good to evolve, right? And to be mindful, but we don't want to lose things that are essential for students to be able to be successful in getting jobs or to be successful in the jobs they ultimately get. So I think we made a big change to our curriculum a couple of years ago where we, in our freshman sequence, we wanted more time to be able to drill down and allow students to engage in active learning and to think. And to do that, we had to remove some of the content from that freshman sequence, which has been advocated for, is challenging for people to let go of. But when we looked at sort of the first year organismal biology, part of that was a lot of like memorization stuff. It was, here is a bird, here are characteristics of birds. And at a certain point, what is the value of that today? It's not that we shouldn't learn about organismal biology, but we should be learning more comparative anatomy and things like this, which happen more at a higher level. So by taking that out, we were able to expand and give students more time to focus on things that are conceptually difficult and that they needed that active learning for. So that's a good evolution. Losing labs is because of financial reasons isn't necessarily, and pushing back about that is important in the undergraduate environment, for sure.
You mentioned before sort of like a pool of faculty in your initial course that were more resistant to change, and I find that in my institution too. And it seems like there's sort of oftentimes the people you get in the room are the people who are already willing to like do the work. And so do you have any suggestions about how to expand that pool to the slightly more resistant individuals? Because I feel like that's part of the problem, is like getting them to buy into the process.
Yeah, and we were very influenced by like the change literature and diffusion of innovation theory. So in diffusion of innovation theory, there are people that are already doing this thing and they need support too to be able to keep doing it. There are people who will never change at the other end of the spectrum. And then there's this big middle. And the middle is not a monolith, right? There are people closer to like, I changed, but I need to feel like I'm part of the cool kids over here, right? And then there's people that are more resistant. And the more you can like chip away at this middle group, the more you can get people to change. And so how do you get the people who are, there's not that will never change, but are in that middle group? So partially how we did this, we really thought about this. Partially how we did this was we identified who we wanted to be in this class. And at the time, we had the support of the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. So she sent out the invitations. And when the invitation comes from the Dean, people are more likely to say yes, right? And it wasn't punitive, right? There was nothing, we weren't saying you should be in this because we think you're not doing a good job. It was, this is an opportunity. And as well, because we had grant funding, and that's important, right? We had grant funding, we were able to buy out their teaching for one term. So it also was seen as like an honor that they got picked to do this. So that's how we got some of those resistant folks. I think there are ways to do it where you don't necessarily need a ton of money, you need a little bit of money or willpower. So sometimes people will allow faculty out of a course without real money being associated with that. It depends on the institution. But it might be that if you can have a partnership with someone in the administration who's willing to work with you and help to recruit those people, that could be another approach to doing this. But it's a very important point. If the whole, like, if you build it, they will come thing is not real, people won't necessarily come to this unless they feel that they will. Now, we've done something else that I didn't talk about today in Castle, which we had pedagogical happy hour. Again, we did have grant funding for the alcohol, which is weird. That came from HHMI. They're okay with alcohol. And they're very okay with alcohol. If you ever go to HHMI, there's alcohol there. But that was, and once the grant funding agency was okay with it, then the institution was okay with it, because I know that's a challenge at a lot of places. So we made it kind of cool to come and talk about pedagogy. The space that we have is nice. We had cheese and crackers and wine. It's not a big deal, right? But it was something that made people feel valued. And we were very deliberate about the people we asked to do those. So we made sure we had people from different STEM disciplines. And so when we invited the chemist, then chemistry faculty showed up because they wanted to support their colleague and hang out. And when we invite the physicists, et cetera. And so in that context, we were able to draw people that don't normally come to these events because it was a happy hour and it was a very casual thing. So somebody got up and talked about their work, but we made it so that you could interrupt and it was more of a discussion. So we did that for a number of years while we had funding, and that worked really well. And then once you get them in the door, sometimes they're like, huh, okay. So now that probably wouldn't work with the people that were close to the resistance side, but it might work with some of the people that are in the middle, more towards the, I would try this side.
We talk about how the reward structure kind of speaks to researchers. And so, and I'm a proponent of the traditional model where faculty does research but also teach. And I think it benefits both the student as well as the faculty in this relationship. But they're speaking moving to a more pure educators, faculty. Do you see that the pure educators are more, because they're training, more open to active learning techniques, where it's the willingness is over the, it's overshadowing them not being researched at all?
I think it really depends. So some people who got involved in teaching really care about teaching, but still have some of these other barriers, like they weren't educated about how to teach. So they had this intrinsic desire to support students, to support learning, but they never learned how to teach, right? And so those people are coming in at a disadvantage with regards to using active learning techniques because they've never been taught. And if you're teaching large classroom environments, that's even more of a barrier because, oh my gosh, not only have I never learned about this, now I've learned this much about it and I have to go implement it with 500 students, right? That's a barrier. So I think that there are people who have gone through something like the PenPro program, or they've done CERTL or some other type of future faculty training program where they're learning about educational approaches. And they choose to go the route of being a teaching faculty or whatever the equivalent is at your institution. And so they have those skills and they're more likely to teach using active learning. And if there's a community and there's a couple people like that, that can sometimes help because once again, we have models and we have a community that can help that group of people to evolve. But likewise, there are tenured and tenure track faculty who come in that have gone through something like the Penford program or CERTL and feel like they want to use those approaches in their teaching. So what we saw from, well, the survey we did didn't specifically look at teaching faculty, it was looking at pre-tenure and tenured faculty. But, you know, I think it really depends. It depends on the institution. It depends on how people were recruited. It depends on when people were recruited. So it's hard to give a solid answer on that, especially because we didn't look at that necessarily in our survey data. It's a good question.
So I guess I have a question about like your, the circuit to the teaching, not teaching, I guess the workshop that you all did with the faculty, I forgot exactly what the name was.
That's okay.
Did you all see like in the folks that like were able to not active learning, were they from specific substance of like, did you see a lot more chemistry in that one, a lot more mathematics, was it pretty even distribution process?
So I can only tell you what I suppose, because with 11 people, we eliminated that kind of demographic information because otherwise I taught the course. In fact, I wasn't involved in the initial analysis for this reason. I taught the course, and if it was like, this person came from chemistry, I would know exactly who that person was. So I can only tell you what I suppose based on the, like, it was stripped of everything, but you know, reading it, it was like, oh, I think I know who that person is, but I don't really know. So this is an important thing when you're doing qualitative work. You want to make sure that you're not outing people. The people who seemed more resistant didn't come from any particular discipline. Age may have played a factor, but maybe not in all cases. So good question. I don't have the answer necessarily to it.
I think we'll have time for one more question.
Just a quick question. Have you seen any impact of the active learning when they're brought into the larger lecture with the number of students? So in other words, is there something that then, if you have those numbers, then we can use and go back to our colleagues and maybe teach those large sections and say, hey, maybe there is something there for you to think of changing a little bit of the curricula to add those time for the active learning, then would have retention or learning.
So there's a ton of data on this. I think Scott Freeman's article is the best. That's the 2016 article I mentioned. And look up Scott Freeman and active learning and you will get this paper. So it was a meta-analysis of hundreds of papers focused on active learning. And what came out of that was active learning is better than straight lecture, just lecture with nothing else. To the point where they said if this was a clinical trial, we would stop the lecture portion. So I think that article is the most powerful thing to bring back to your colleagues and has a lot more rich information about why based on the meta-analysis they did.
Thank you.
This is from Susan Willett. She wants to say that her dad would be so happy to see this kind of work and dedication.
That's an honor. Thank you so much for that comment, Suzanne.
And with that, please thank Jen for that. Thank you for presenting tonight. And if you parked in the Drexel Park and the validation, Dan has the validation for you.